Today on Thought Rock Live, we have Julie Reaume. Julie is the Director of Development for MindMuze. MindMuze is a sister company to Thought Rock and BeWise. And she's going to be speaking to us today about project management, how to get projects back on track. Even though we don't like to admit it, projects sometimes go off the rails. How do we get them back on track as efficiently and as effectively as possible? How do we keep our cool and confidence while redirecting projects toward success? So Julie will talk about how to spot early warning signs, get projects back on track when they are off, and what you need to do to rescue those projects. So key learnings coming out of today will be how to manage bumpy projects. Didn't know there was such a thing. How to reinstate confidence in clients and get them back on board, and how to focus and remotivate internal teams. Kind of reminds me, I was golfing one day and somebody said, "Boy, you're really good with that 3-iron getting out of the rough." And I said, "That's because I have a lot of practice." In Julie's case, she manages a lot of projects. And not a lot of them go off track, but she does know what to do. So looking forward to today's session. I'll turn it over to you, Julie.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So what I'd like to do is start with a real-world example. So a case study. I always find when we put things into real-world scenarios, we can understand them a little better. So we've got our friend Sarah. Sarah began work on a new project. She'd established a great rapport with her client. She'd assembled her internal team, created a timeline with buffer, confirmed the work could be done within 3 months and on budget. In short, well prepared and set up for success. Well, we can insert my name here, or probably most of us on the call, I'm assuming. We all go into our projects with the best of intentions, with positivity, and hopefully excitement that things will go well and we'll have some fun. Oftentimes we feel well prepared and confident and look forward to the projects coming to life. And for me, that's the really fun part of the job. Okay, fast forward to 6 months later. We've got Sarah over budget. Project's only 50% complete. The client's lost complete confidence in Sarah to get the work done. Her internal team now is frustrated, and they're saying they just want to get the project over with. Now, how did this happen? At what point did Sarah's project go off track? So we'll take a look at the possible reasons that this happened and how a project that was set up for success went in the exact opposite direction. And let's face it, most of us on this call can insert our names in here too. I think most of us has had this happen where we start out with something great and then we're stepping back thinking, where did I go wrong? And we have to ask ourselves that question because as project managers, it's our job and responsibility to identify this. The trick is to identify this so we get back on track, not at the end of a project. And it can be done. So here we have some words to live and to work by. So let's look at how we think. We all want to knock it out of the park. We all want our projects to run seamlessly with no bumps or obstacles. No bumpy projects, and they do exist. But what we need to see that is managing those bumps and those obstacles successfully is actually knocking it out of the park. That's part of success. It's how we navigate through the ebbs and flows. That's where our success lies. It's not in perfection, because I have yet to run a project that runs perfectly. I have to flag a potential risk or two, or at times 10 or 11, to make sure the project goes from start to finish and is done meeting expectations. That's the job. That's why we need our PMs. So this is why I put these quotes up here. Let's stop telling ourselves that the next project will run smoother than the one before, and let's get better at identifying risk in the one that you're in. And most importantly, how to communicate that risk. And I'll get into detail about that later on. So these are just some ideas to change our way of thinking. So, warning, challenges ahead. So now that I've tried to put the thought in your head that no project will ever run without a bump or two in the road, how do we identify possible risks that can take us off track? and what are the signs that should cause us to step back and reassess our project and the potential impacts to it? I'd like to take a minute to first note that risk does not equal fault or blame. Risk factors are situations that happen that we must manage. Finger pointing does little to help. In fact, it often does the opposite. So let's take away the association with risk and blame. Noting that a project may be in jeopardy through status reports that define roles and tasks and accountability, that's identifying risk. Documenting a project timeline that will be at risk if the design team, for example, does not issue an approval by April 20th. That's noting a risk. Complaining that the design team is not doing their job to people on your team, that's just gossip. That's not noting a risk. So we have to think about that. What are the warning signs, and how do we convey them? Whispers and blame game, it doesn't work. Honest, focused talking, that'll do it, with the appropriate parties, not about the appropriate parties. So, what are the factors that can put our projects at risk? We have several, and it's very easy to say, yes, insufficient time. That'll put my project at risk. They didn't give me enough time. We overcommitted on the timeline. And yeah, that will put your project at risk. Will it make it fail? Not necessarily. I can't stress enough how quickly this one needs to be communicated. Think about it. Your clients, the people you're reporting to, they book meetings, deliverables, etc. around your project dates, a presentation, a rollout, a conference. These may all be part of your project and you don't even know it. People make commitments to their directors, their bosses, CEOs, etc. based on what you tell them. If you're not giving them the honest truth about what you can meet and what you can't, well, that's a danger sign. So the sooner a project's timeline slippage is discussed, the better. That's what I'm trying to say. But go in prepared. Don't go in and say we can't meet the timeline. How do you put it back on track? Well, you have a clear plan on what you can deliver for a certain date. Talk to your internal team. Collaborate with them. See what's realistic for your team to accomplish. For example, can the deliverable be met if you put more resources on it? Is it impossible to meet the deadline? Then see if there's a critical piece of the overall project that could be rolled out rather than the entire project. Open communication and a willingness to be flexible can get you back on track from this one. Take a how do we get this done approach with your team rather than just get it done. Take accountability when speaking to your client. Offer suggestions, not excuses. So again, yes, timeline slippage can certainly put a project at risk, but if you go in with solutions driven, if you can sometimes find solutions without even going to the client, great. Underestimated budget. These are two biggies, again, same as the above. Flag this one quickly. No one wants to hear at the end of a project how much over budget you are for the first time. Flag it early and you may find ways to stop the problem before it snowballs and you've eaten up your entire budget. Again, this is a good one to run internally first if you have external clients. Can we use less resources and still produce quality? Where can we cut? You could ask yourself these questions. Sometimes this one does turn into a lessons learned, but flagging it early will help things stop from going way out of proportion. Not addressing this will cause a budget to spiral out of control rather than just going over budget. And there is a difference between the two. Wrong resources. And perhaps wrong resources is not the right terminology. The wrong resource for the project. It doesn't matter how talented somebody is at what they do. If their skill set isn't necessarily appropriate for the project, yeah, you're going to find challenges and that might put the project at risk. What you can do in this case is, if possible, change different people working on the project or mentoring, checkpoints. Really take a hands-on approach where you're really fostering learning. And this one, again, it's a tricky one to get around, but if you can, you can do it. If you address it early, if you pretend that everything's right on a project, and every person on the project, even if they're not working well, if you pretend they are, putting your head in the sand on this one is not going to work. Address the problem. address the person, do what you need to do to get it back on track. We've got another biggie is disengagement from key stakeholders. I'll give you an example, and this happens all the time. New management comes in and decides that, not so much a high priority project anymore. Not really interested. And this is a project that you were working on very steadily, everything was going well, and then the buy-in just doesn't seem to be there. What you can do is find out if you need to realign the project, refocus it maybe, engage the key stakeholder who is disengaged. Offer to make a presentation as to why this initiative was undertaken in the first place and why it was considered important. Stress the benefits. Stress the what's in it for me to the stakeholder. What I would suggest is offer to do it before it's asked. Many times when new management comes in, they'll say, well, why are we doing this? What's the point of doing that? If you can offer that up first, maybe you've addressed an argument that will never be. Scope creep. That's another one. A client and a PM have two very different ideas of, let's say, what revisions are. I'll use that as an example. Me, personally, I think it's last-minute tweaks to a product that's just about approved. A client may see this as an opportunity to rework and entirely change the concept. Huge, huge disconnect that can result in budget and timeline overages. The way to get this one under control is from the very beginning. Regular checkpoints, sign-offs are key. Raise this risk even before it happens. Before any major part of a project is undertaken, explain what is involved and what is not. Document this. Really, this one, you can raise this risk even before it happens. I can't stress that enough. If scope creep still happens, this is where as a PM, you need to have a difficult conversation. And that is part of our job. I've actually seen learning programs based on how to have difficult conversations. It's okay to say, we can't do that for this timeline, for this budget. What about a version 2? One of my favorite sayings is, we can do anything, given the time and the budget. It's okay to have those conversations. Unidentified risks. Basically, this is, you didn't mention any of the above when they were happening. Now, it's past the point where they'll just go away or work themselves out. This one happens all the time. This is often when things need to be escalated. Now, escalating is not necessarily a bad thing and is absolutely needed at times, but no client should be ever saying, why wasn't I told about this? So this is one of the biggest reasons in my career I've seen projects go off track. No one spoke up. Again, goes back to the difficult conversations. Believe me, your conversation is much less difficult when you do speak up. Unforeseen changes. This one happens. I'm going to give a real-world example. You're working on a systems training rollout, and the system is now slated for a complete overhaul. Everything you've worked on will be obsolete in about a year. What do? Do you keep working with your head down, saying, well, we were summoned to do this project, we should just finish it? No. The best thing to do is ask how you can help rather than, well, what can I do? When changes happen, it's cliche, but be part of the solution. And I'd like to add, stopping work on a project does not make it a failure. Sometimes it makes good sense. So there you have some of the warning signs. So again, we don't like to admit this, but projects do go off the track all the time and can do so several times throughout a project's life cycle. But that doesn't mean the project will fail. It just means you have to address that issue and get it back on track. So let's go back to Sarah for a moment from our case study. So what happened to Sarah? Client had a new manager who wasn't engaged. Skill set of some of the resources weren't a good match, and responsibilities and accountabilities were not clear. People don't know what they don't know. People can't deliver what they don't know they had to. None of this, as you can see, is timeline or budget related, but they all have a huge, huge impact on it. 3 months behind and only 50% completed, if you remember from the earlier slide, somebody has to justify that, and there will be a dollar amount. So what we need to do is look at what the earlier tips and tricks. The client had a new manager who wasn't engaged. Approvals and reviews were not happening when they needed to. He didn't care. It created communication issues. Nobody was delivering things on time, etc. It doesn't matter. I hear this a lot too. If you get along with your client, I've heard that a lot. That well, the client really likes me. It's great if your client likes you. It's great if your team likes you. It's not necessary for running a smooth project. What they have to do is be able to rely on you and have confidence in you. And that's key. But if you're not providing the proper work, if deliveries aren't clear, if accountabilities aren't stated, if people, again, don't know what they don't know, and you've got a team of people, both internal and external, shrugging their shoulders, yeah, it's not going to work. But again, all goes back to over-communication and identifying all those risks and speaking up. And when things have really gone off track, like with Sarah, where she's just found herself in a real situation, this is when to make things simple. People, process, technology. Go back to this. It's been a cornerstone of IDLE, I'm sure you all know. So when projects do go astray, regroup and look at these three basic things. Any successful project needs a balance of these three elements. Get the balance solid, and you'll be okay. It sounds simple, but there is work to do. So we have our people. Who's a part of the project? What are their roles? Do they have the skills required to do the work? Are they empowered to do the work? Do they understand what's required? Do you have commitment and buy-in from everybody? Without this, your project will go off track. You have to identify if you've got the right people working on the right project. Critical. Process. Is there a process or processes in place for your project? Is everyone aware of the processes? Have they been clarified? Can they be followed and adhered to easily and effectively? If there are no processes in place, why and how to implement them? Technology. This, like processes, means different things depending on your industry and where you work, but do you have the needed technology to make your project work, or to build your project, or enable your team? I kind of look at this one as a tools and technology. I've clearly simplified these three ideas for this purpose, but for me, I find the more difficult and complex a situation, the more simple you need to be. So,
Julie, we did have a question, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
Maybe a couple. The first was you talked about people and making sure you have the right people. Do you have any suggested techniques or tools to do that?
Sure. And that's, you know what, I appreciate that that question. It's a good one. I think a lot of us, and I've been guilty of it in the past, is you've got a project, you have a very aggressive timeline, it's starting right away. Who's free? That's probably the worst mistake you can make. Who's free? Who can do this project? What you need to do is make sure that it's a good match for their skill set. If it's something very highly technical, and you're putting somebody who's really great with the soft skills on it, it's not going to work well. Can it work? Yes, but again, your project might go off track as they'll struggle. So the more you can match a particular skill, and that basically just means knowing who you have working for you. Do you have someone who excels in certain types of writing, in certain types of design, in certain types of technology builds? It really depends on your project. But whose skill set matches, and if they're not free or they're busy with something else for the moment, how can you stagger it? My best advice for this, and John, you might have more to give, but is not putting somebody on a project based first and foremost if they're available.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And since you asked my opinion, probably a mistake, but the other thing that I've seen that works well for really large projects, and most large organizations would have access to some kind of a tool. It is also to look at people from a personality aptitude perspective. So who are the leaders, who are the doers, who are the communicators? And we have a personality profiling tool that we've used in the past, actually, which will develop a team profile. So when you assemble the team, you basically tell the software, here's our team that's been assembled. They've all done that personality profile. It'll come back and say, yeah, you're missing a taskmaster, for not in those words, but for lack of a better explanation, or your communication skills are lacking on this project team. So there's two dimensions or more, but from a people perspective, right? You're looking at competencies, and those are based on skills and aptitudes as well.
And I couldn't agree more, because particularly if you're talking about a large project, that usually means a lot of people working on it. And if you have some personalities that simply aren't going to work well together, you're going to have trouble. Again, yeah. So that is a great tool. Okay.
Very good. There's just one other quick question here, Julie.
Yep.
When you talked about technology,
yes.
you mentioned communication. Do you have any suggestions or observations about communication tools that work well on projects?
Again, it does depend on how large the team is, on the organization. I mean, having worked both with local teams and with remote teams, there's so many ways you can stay in touch and really create a workspace. Obviously, when you're all in the same place, weekly meetings in person, etc., that's great. For remote teams, there's lots and lots of software out there that can have video meetings. I highly, highly recommend that. It gives everybody a sense of belonging. When you can see people's faces, I don't know why, it just sort of makes things seem a little more personal. Lots of tools out there if you're talking about, again, remote teams, Skype, different types of messaging tools, instant messaging tools. GoToMeetings are fabulous to keep everybody looking at the same thing on the same page, all the WebEx out there, things like that, especially if you need to get buy-in from either client or internal. And getting together in the same room is not always an option. Those kind of tools which allow people to see each other and to see the exact same thing in real time I think they're really vital. And that's that. Is there any other questions on
Great,
technology? Or?
No, we're good to go.
Okay. Okay. So, Sarah's project. Where did Sarah's project falter? And how could this have been avoided? So, people, wrong resources and no buy-in from new management. Process, no one knew what they were doing. And where were the accountabilities ever documented? Again, this affected timeline and budget. How are these even being tracked? So, how to rescue a project like this? We're going to go back to people, processes, and technology, because there's no one solution, as every project has its special nuances, it's unique. However, if you do identify risks early on and ensure you don't bury your head, you'll get things on track. If they do slip in a major way, such as Sarah's, go back to basics and identify where your problems lie. And I really do recommend this. Make a chart of what went wrong and classify it under people, processes, and technology. You don't need to share it necessarily, either with your internal team or the client. You can, if it's written in an appropriate way. But it is astounding how clear things can become when you write it down and categorize what happened, what category is it in, and a recommended solution. I can't stress enough, again, it's not about blame at this point. And it doesn't mean you should hesitate from making difficult decisions. If you need to completely refocus the project, if you need to take somebody off of the project. But assigning blame is reactive. This is more of a cause and a solution, and it's a much better approach. So although it does take some time to document what happened and what category it's in and what your solution is, I find writing it down it's an exercise that helps you solve it. So in short, doing the upfront work, as we all know, saves you work down the road. And really, if your project's gone off track, take the people, process, technology, chart it, and the solutions will start becoming clear. Okay, getting clients back on board. Clients will forgive you for errors and mistakes if you deliver great customer service. But the irony is, if you're delivering great customer service, a lot of the miscommunication and mistakes are avoided. In Sarah's case, her client lost confidence in her. I think it might have been different in this case study if Sarah had offered her help to get the new manager's buy-in, or if she had engaged in a really frank, honest discussion about the issues that were happening with the internal team, but had identified to her client solutions on how she was going to address it. It was no secret to the client that there were challenges, as deliverables were not meeting expectations. So I'm wondering if Sarah had followed processes that ensured everyone on the team knew what their responsibilities were, if she wouldn't have been in a very different place 6 months from now. The project may have stalled due to lack of buy-in. That does happen sometimes. But the point is, Sarah would have done everything in her power to have managed it and would have minimized the negative impact. So again, we go back to the basics of flag things early, identify risks, and have open communication. Remotivating internal teams. Now, we don't want to forget about that. Our clients are important, but our teams are equally as important. And we really need to avoid the just get it done mentality. Enthusiasm is contagious, and so is frustration. If you're a PM and you're leading a call saying, oh, I know what a pain this project is, or, okay, I know you're all sick of working on this project, but we have to get it done, then you're setting a tone that that your whole team's going to follow. I think PMs sometimes mistake this as empathy. It's not. It's really, really toxic. So the PM sets the tone, and it is your job to keep the team engaged and re-engage them when you need to. The way to do this is through collaboration, and I put this as a bullet point because it's not to be confused with a complaint session. And sometimes that happens, and the way to focus on what is in your power and work with it. Focus on what was going right and why, and elicit feedback that's actionable and proactive. For instance, you're getting feedback like, oh, this project is a disaster. Well, what can we do to change that? Or, I hate this project. What needs to happen for you to enjoy working on it again? You know, oh, the client's a nightmare. Well, what in particular are you finding challenging? Saying, I know, I understand. That doesn't necessarily, again, it's not empathy. It's a negative, very contagious, toxic thing. Okay, you're struggling. How do we take that back? How do we make this experience more empowering for you? And also, when people are pressed in a proactive way for feedback, you might find the anger dissipating and solutions emerging. And that's my advice on getting your team back. Next time, what I'll be talking about in June, I believe it is this will be happening with Sarah's project, likely, is postmortems without blame. And that's how to, when a project doesn't go that well and you're in a position to explain why, how to conduct one of those meetings. And that's another thing to think about, to get your project back on track. If you just haven't, what I would suggest is conducting again, postmortem without blame, which is documenting everything that happened, start to finish, where things went off track, where things could have been changed, and how it's going to be done better in the future. So that is my presentation on how to get projects back on track.
Well, we do have some questions, Julie.
Okay.
So question number one, how would you manage when your sponsor disengages or cancels your update meetings, etc.?
That's a great question because it does happen. Again, proactive. People are busy, and I think people sometimes think, well, you know, it's just an update, right? I know what's going on. What I would do is don't cancel the meetings. It's critical to have those meetings. I would, again, contact the sponsors, explain how busy they are or how time challenged, etc. Ask if there's a better time. If there's not a better time, continue to have the meetings internally, even if you have to. Obviously, there's other people working on the project. Have the meeting with all other key players and then document it and put it down in a status report. If you absolutely cannot get that person into a meeting, at least have it documented somehow. But never cancel the update meetings. That would be my advice.
Very good.
Those are critical.
Excellent. We had another question here. Do you, as a project manager, communicate to the rest of the team their responsibility for keeping the project on track?
Yes and no. I mean, it's the PM is there, as far as I'm concerned, the PM's there to make sure things are on track. I like to think people are responsible for their own deadlines. It gives them a sense of accountability and a sense of ownership. What I do as a PM, though, is I do like to check in maybe a day or two before, let's say it's a short timeline, a day or two before a deliverable is due, or if it's a longer, larger initiative, a week or two, say, how's it going? Are we still good for this time? Do you need anything from me? It's I kind of see it as I'm the person that people will come to when they need things. So instead of micromanaging, what I like to do is reach out to people, gently remind them of their dates, and have them confirm one way or the other, yes, I'm okay, or no, I think I'm struggling, I need this, this, and this to hit my target. Again, conversation, and often it depends on how big the project is and your relationship, but backed up with an email isn't a bad idea either.
Okay. We have another question. I might do some interpretation here. I'll read the question to you. What kind of OLAs do you suggest we have with internal teams for projects to go successfully? And an OLA, Julie, if you remember from your idle work, is an operating level agreement. So if I interpret this correctly, what it means is if a project's, for example, in the IT world, going across departments, then what kind of agreements do you need in place across those departments to make sure it goes well?
Yeah, that's tricky, and it can be done. I mean, I've worked on projects that go across several departments. What you need, and John, feel free to jump in because I know this is your area of expertise. What I typically do is any kind of master timeline or master accountabilities list stays with me, and I try and break things down that are specific to that department, and have everybody be a piece of the puzzle, but focus mostly on their responsibilities. I'm not sure if that answers the question, though.
Yeah, I think partly. The other thing I would say is I'm not sure that there are standard operating level agreements that would exist over time that would really pertain to projects, but it harkens back to another question and really comes back to stakeholders and sponsors. So at the project kickoff stage, it's really important that the roles are identified, the time requirements are identified, and then the stakeholders and managers commit that time. And then the second piece I would say is, from a communications perspective, good old peer pressure works. So the regular reporting that you talked about, if there's a risk to the project and that risk is being created because somebody or some department is unable to meet their commitments, then you can, in a non-blame kind of fashion, raise that issue and say, hey, I always come back, when you talk about people, process, technologies, whenever I'm trying to mitigate something, like a project going bad, I always try to communicate it from a process perspective. So I'm pretty unlikely to go back and say, the problem is this person is not, they didn't make their commitment, or they didn't perform this task on time, or they're consistently not performing their tasks on time. I'd go back to process and say, hey, the process is that we assign people with availability and the right skill set, and we don't seem to have followed the process.
Right.
So you avoid that conflict where, you know, you're calling somebody out and saying, hey, you're not doing your job. You're not doing your job with respect to this project. And you really put it back to a process in a non-blame. And you may talk more about that in your next presentation.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to disempower anybody regardless of their skill set or their role in the project, that's for sure.
Right. Exactly. All right. I don't see any other questions, Julie. I think I'll ramble on for one more moment about a couple of things and just watch for other questions. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Quick reminder, next week is bringing 2012 into focus through goal setting, and Helene Egan will be presenting that topic. She was very well received last time, so if you didn't have a chance to listen to her on a previous Thought Rock Live session, please be sure to tune in and tell your friends and colleagues. Welcome to join us. Same time, same bat channel. I don't see any other questions. Julie, if you just go to the last screen, yes. I think. We'll leave that up for a few minutes. As Wanda may have mentioned, these webcasts are recorded, and we'll send a link out to everyone. So if you found this useful but think one of your colleagues might find it as or more useful, please feel free to share that link. And thank you again for attending. And everyone, I hope you have a great day. A quick comment, very helpful topic. Thanks. Well, you're welcome. And thanks to all of those of you who posed questions. Thanks from Kevin as well. So there you go.
Thank you.